Come with me. A millionaire CEO found a little girl sleeping at a bus stop. What happened the next day will break you. Snow fell like feathers in the dark, soft, and silent over the sleepy streets of Asheville, North Carolina. It was the kind of night where even the street lamps looked tired, their glow barely piercing the falling white curtain. Most people were safe inside, curled up under blankets, sipping something warm, never once imagining who might be out there in the cold. But tonight someone was Garrett Moore, 35, founder and CEO of a top financial consulting firm, stepped out of a swanky downtown building. A meeting had run late. His tailored overcoat did little to warm the tension still clinging to his shoulders. Garrett had it all, wealth, success, recognition. But if you looked closely, you'd see a hollowness in his eyes, the kind that money never fills. A sleek black town car idled at the curb, waiting to take him back to his penthouse. But Garrett paused. For reasons he couldn't quite name, he lifted a hand and waved the driver off. "I'll walk," he muttered, stuffing gloved hands into his pockets as he turned down a quieter side street. The world was hushed. His polished leather shoes crunched over fresh snow, the only sound in the stillness, until he noticed a shape beneath the flickering glow of a bus stop shelter. A child. She was curled on a frozen bench, no older than 4, wrapped in a hoodie that barely covered her knees. Her cheeks were red and raw from the cold. One sneaker had come off. Her tiny fingers clutched a plastic backpack to her chest like it was treasure. Garrett stopped. He glanced around. No adults, no car, just her and the cold. He knelt down slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly. "You okay?" The girl stirred and opened her eyes. They were startlingly clear-eyed and trusting. "Are you the miracle?" she asked, barely above a whisper. That question hit him like a blow to the chest. What? My mama said one would come, someone who'd stay." Garrett stared at her. In his world, everything had an explanation. But this little soul in the snow, it made no sense. He stood, pulled off his thick coat, and gently draped it over her. She sank into the warmth, like she hadn't felt safe in weeks. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ellie." And just like that, Garrett Moore, the man who never stopped for anything, sat down on a frozen bench beside a child named Ellie and waited. For what he didn't know. But he stayed. The wind picked up as the snow thickened. Across town, beneath a rusted shelter near the back of a local food pantry, Rachel Bennett clutched a damp paper bag close to her chest. Inside were 2 styrofoam containers of chili and a dinner roll. That was all she could get before they closed for the night. Her feet ached. Her gloves were thin. But all she could think about was getting back to Ellie. She'd told her daughter she wouldn't be long. Back before the snow covers your toes, she had whispered, tucking her into the coat and setting her gently on the bus bench. That corner was near a hospital, always lit half safe and familiar. Still, leaving her even for 20 minutes twisted Rachel's stomach into knots. When she rounded the corner and saw the bench, her heart stopped. Someone was sitting with Ellie. A man. Her baby was wrapped in a coat too big for her. His coat. And the man, he was talking. Calm, low voice, no sudden moves. Ellie sat upright, watching him like he was reading her a bedtime story. Rachel didn't think. The bag hit the ground as she bolted toward the bench. "Ellie." She dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter close, shielding her with every ounce of strength she had left. "Are you okay? Did he touch you?" she demanded, panic laced into every word. The man stood but kept his hands up, palms open. "I swear I didn't hurt her. I was just keeping her warm." She was alone. It was freezing. Rachel's breath came in short bursts. She scanned his face, clean-shaven, young, serious. No wild eyes, no aggression, just tired, almost sad. "You don't get to just sit with someone's child," she snapped. "I understand," he said gently, "but she looks so cold. I didn't want to leave her." "Mommy, he's nice," Ellie said, still clutching the coat. "He didn't scare me. He stayed." Rachel looked down. Her daughter's hands weren't shaking anymore. Her lips weren't blue. She exhaled slowly. "What's your name?" she asked the man still guarded. Garrett Moore." She blinked. The name didn't register, just another stranger. He stood there in nothing but a dress shirt, now snow clinging to his shoulders, not even trying to reclaim his coat. "If you're gonna run around without a jacket," Rachel muttered, "that's your problem." Garrett offered a small nod. "You can keep it. For her. She hesitated, then slowly sat back down on the bench, Ellie in her lap, still wrapped in warmth. Garrett lowered himself beside them again, but kept a respectful distance this time. They sat in silence, broken only by the wind and the faint city hum. Rachel finally spoke, her voice quieter now. "We stay here sometimes. It's safer than the shelters." Garrett didn't pry. He didn't ask for details. He just listened. And for the first time in a very long time, Rachel didn't feel completely alone. They sat like that for nearly 10 minutes, three figures framed by snow and silence. Ellie, still nestled in Garrett's coat, began to drift back to sleep in her mother's arms. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that happens when no one knows what to say, but knows something meaningful just occurred. Garrett cleared his throat. "There's a motel," he said quietly. "A couple blocks over. It's not much, but it's warm, clean. You can stay there tonight, both of you. I'll cover it. No questions, no names, no strings." Rachel's eyes darted toward him, guarded again. Why, she asked. "Why would you do that?" "Because I can," he said, "and because no one should sleep outside in this weather, especially not a child." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "You'd be surprised how many people disagree with that." "I'm not most people." "No," she said slowly. "You're not?" He stood brushing snow from his sleeves. "I'll walk with you, just to the front desk, then I'll disappear. You'll never owe me anything." Rachel hesitated, and then Ellie stirred again, blinking up at her mother with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, he feels warm. Like cocoa." Rachel closed her eyes for a moment. "All right," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Garrett said nothing more. He simply nodded and waited, while Rachel stood adjusting the coat around Ellie's small frame. They walked in silence, the three of them, a strange trio moving through soft snow. Garrett stayed a respectful step behind. At the motel, Garrett handled everything quickly and quietly. No name, no fanfare. He slid the key across the counter to Rachel. "You'll be okay here," he said, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Ellie. Rachel nodded. "Thank you." Garrett turned to leave the door already swinging open when a tiny voice called out behind him. "Garrett." He turned. Ellie stood there clutching her backpack, hair falling into her eyes. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. "I still have more of the miracle story to tell." The words hit him like cold air in the lungs. He crouched down, meeting her eyes. "I'll try," he said softly. "I'd like to hear it." She smiled, a sleepy content smile, then ran back to her mother's side. As Garrett stepped into the snow-covered night, he felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't trusted in years. His heart. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to walk away. The next morning, Garrett Moore sat in his corner office on the 28th floor of a gleaming glass tower. A mug of untouched black coffee cooled beside him as he stared blankly at the skyline. Below him, the city buzzed. Emails flew, deals were made, meetings stacked by the hour. But Garrett couldn't hear any of it. All he could think about was Ellie. And her voice? "Will you come back tomorrow?" That question had echoed in his head all night. Something about the way she said miracle, like she truly believed in them, like she believed he was one. He wasn't. Garrett had spent his life building things, wealth, status, reputation. He could calculate ROI in his sleep-close deals with a handshake and cut ties without blinking. But nothing in his 35 years had prepared him for a 4-year-old asking him to stay. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Marie," he said when his assistant answered. "I need a quiet background check. Discreet. Her name is Rachel Bennett, late 20s. Has a daughter, Ellie. I think she worked in food service before. All this. I don't want police records or gossip. I just want to know who she is." There was a pause. Then, understood. Marie didn't ask why. She never did. By late afternoon, a simple report landed in Garrett's inbox. No drama, no red flags, just life unraveling in typed lines. Rachel Bennett, 29, former sous chef at a neighborhood cafe in West Asheville, laid off during the pandemic, never rehired, evicted 8 months later, no criminal record, volunteered consistently at shelters, one daughter, no family listed. Garrett read it twice. She had done everything right, worked hard, paid rent, stayed clean, and still the world swept her to the sidewalk. He leaned back in his chair, the hum of the office falling away. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't begged or played the victim. She had squared her shoulders against the cold, carried her child, and kept moving. There was a strength in that, a quiet, burning kind that Garrett couldn't shake. Later that evening, he found himself outside a worn brick building with frost on its windows, the same community kitchen listed in her report. He stood on the sidewalk watching through the glass. Inside, Rachel was moving like someone who belonged. She wore an oversized sweatshirt and a borrowed apron. Her hair was tied back loosely, her sleeves pushed to her elbows as she stirred a giant pot of something steaming. She moved with calm, practiced grace, chopping, ladling, tasting. And she smiled at people. Not out of obligation, but kindness. Garrett didn't go in. Not yet. But something deep inside him told him he would. Because this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. The next evening, Garrett returned not in a suit, but in jeans and an old jacket that hadn't seen daylight in years. He stood at the back of the community kitchen just beyond the entryway, as volunteers bustled about, preparing that night's dinner. It smelled of potatoes, onions, and rosemary, homey and warm. Rachel stood in the center of it all. No spotlight, no praise, just quiet movement and focused hands. She stirred a pot of vegetable stew, wiped her brow with her forearm, and smiled as she passed a bowl to an elderly man waiting patiently. Every motion seemed instinctive, natural. She belonged here in a way Garrett had never felt anywhere, and she hadn't even noticed him. He watched as she washed her hands between servings, always made sure the next person got a full scoop, never served herself until every tray was empty. She spoke to each person, not just handing out food, but acknowledging them. A nod. How was your day? Even when people didn't answer, she still asked. She wasn't serving meals. She was serving dignity. After the rush died down, Rachel sank onto a milk crate near the back wall and sipped tea from a styrofoam cup. Her shoulders slumped, but not in defeat, just in exhaustion. Even worn out, there was something radiant about her. Garrett took a breath and stepped inside. Rachel looked up, startled. "Oh," she said, "it's you." "Sorry," he replied, holding up his hands like he had that first night. "Didn't mean to sneak up. Just, I support this place. Quietly. I wanted to see how it was being used." Rachel arched an eyebrow. "And now you've seen—" He chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess I have." She was quiet for a long moment, then looked down at her tea. "You're watching me like I'm a project." "No," Garrett said, stepping forward slightly. "I'm watching because you're remarkable. And no one seems to notice but your daughter and maybe me." Rachel didn't smile. Not yet. But her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "I used to cook," she said finally. "Before everything changed. I miss it." "I could help," he said. "There's a little left in a community fund I oversee. Could offer a small stipend. Nothing flashy. Just something steady, if you want. I'm not asking for charity." "It's not charity," Garrett replied. "It's recognizing value." Rachel studied him for a long beat, her expression unreadable. Then finally, quietly, she said, "I'll cook, but only if it's on my terms." Garrett nodded. Of course. That night she stayed late prepping soup for tomorrow. Garrett lingered in the corner, pretending to check his phone. But really, he was just watching her bring order to a world that had offered her none. It started the next night, and the one after that, and the one after that. After the last bowl of stew had been served, after the counters had been wiped and the lights dimmed, Rachel would pack a few containers of leftovers into a paper bag. And Garrett, standing near the door with his coat zipped up and gloves on, would ask softly, "Mind if I walk with you?" She always paused, then handed him a box. "You'll need gloves," she'd say, "and maybe some humility." And off they'd go, through dim alleyways and frozen back streets, down to the forgotten corners of Asheville where the most vulnerable sought shelter in stairwells under bridges behind churches. People who didn't want to be seen. People who wouldn't step inside a soup kitchen, but would quietly accept a warm meal delivered by someone who knelt low and didn't judge. Rachel didn't just give food. She gave presence. She would crouch in slush beside a man wrapped in garbage bags and ask if he wanted extra bread. She'd greet a woman curled up behind a newspaper stand with a "Hey, sweetheart," and leave a spoon tucked beside the container. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush. And every time she looked them in the eye, Garrett had never seen that before. He had donated millions signed off on shelter blueprints and approved grants, but he had never once knelt beside someone in the cold and seen them. Not like Rachel did. One night as they passed the steps of a boarded-up chapel, Garrett finally asked, "Why do you always look at them like that, even when they won't look back?" Rachel paused. The wind cut through the alley, and her breath hung in the air. "Because someone needs to," she said. "If they think no one sees them, they'll stop believing they matter." He said nothing, just nodded a quiet respect anchoring deeper. In those nights together, something changed between them, not suddenly, but softly. A joke shared over spilled coffee, a laugh at a stray cat stealing biscuits, a moment of silence that didn't feel heavy, but safe. One evening, she told him about her childhood, a mother who worked night shifts, a tiny kitchen that always smelled like lentils, how she used to sit on the counter and stir with a wooden spoon twice her size. Garrett, hesitant at first, shared about losing his mom at 12, how he had buried himself in business to avoid the ache, how he'd learned to replace love with logic. "You built an empire," Rachel said, "but maybe I forgot how to build a home." That night back at the kitchen, as they scrubbed trays side by side, she flung a dish towel at him for splashing water. "You're terrible at cleaning." He laughed. "Shocking. I've only ever cleaned up market crashes." And in the background, Ellie giggled, drawing peppermint circles with a crayon. By now, Garrett had made it a habit finishing his corporate work early, skipping fancy dinners, trading conference calls for cracked sidewalks and cold hands. What once felt like obligation now felt like purpose. And while he didn't say it out loud, he was beginning to look forward to every second he got with Rachel and Ellie, especially Rachel. There was something magnetic in the way she moved with intention, never wasting emotion, never doing anything halfway, and she didn't know it, but he noticed everything. She'd hum quietly while stirring soup, tap the counter twice before tasting, pause before offering someone food, like it mattered that she gave it gently, not just quickly. She wasn't saving people, she was seeing them, and that saved him. But Garrett knew how fragile things like this could be, how kindness sometimes wilted when pressure arrived, how life had taught Rachel not to expect good things to last. So he didn't tell her what he did next. One morning during a meeting with his company's philanthropic foundation, Garrett quietly purchased the deed to a long-closed cafe nestled in a walkable corner of town. Brick walls, a faded awning, good bones. It had once been called Della's Hearth. He remembered Rachel once said, "All I ever wanted was a stove of my own, a place that smells like fresh bread. Somewhere people feel welcome." He didn't hesitate. No press, no announcement, just a line item in a quiet fund and a private contractor ready to restore the building. His only instruction, no branding, no big name, just warmth. At night, as Rachel packed up the kitchen and Ellie dozed in a chair with marker on her fingers, Garrett would imagine her there in that cafe, writing a chalkboard menu, stirring soup, laughing behind the counter. A soft bell ringing as someone walked through the door, not to be served, but to be seen. He didn't just imagine the cafe, he imagined a home. Not just for her, but for them. Still, he said nothing. He didn't want to risk it, not yet. Instead, he brought Ellie her favorite peppermint candies, one in each pocket, and smiled when she squealed, "You always bring minty snowballs." Rachel would arch a brow and mutter, "Spoiling her." But there was never real anger in it. Just that soft warmth he'd come to crave. And one night, as they locked up the soup kitchen, Garrett stood at the edge of the sidewalk watching snow begin to fall again. Rachel glanced at him and said, "Snow's coming earlier this year." He looked at her, at the way the light hit her hair, at the ease with which she stood beside him, and thought, "Let it come." Because for the first time in his life, he had something worth weathering the storm for. The day it unraveled began like any other. Rachel arrived at the community kitchen, early, hair tied up, sleeves rolled. Ellie, bundled in her puffy coat, helped stock paper bowls with her usual commentary. "This one's for someone who's sad," she'd say, drawing a smiley face on the lid with crayon. "They'll feel better after soup." Garrett wasn't due for another hour. He had promised to stop by after a quick check-in at the office. Nothing unusual, but what Rachel didn't know, what she wasn't meant to know, was that he'd already arrived. She was chopping carrots in the back room when she heard his voice, muffled but unmistakable. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but then she heard her name. Yes, construction's on schedule, Garrett was saying on the phone. Hearth Cafe should be ready by spring. Keep the foundation's name on everything I don't want Rachel to know yet. Not until it's ready. Her hand froze mid-chop. The knife clattered onto the cutting board. Hearth Cafe. She stepped quietly into the hallway, just in time to see him end the call. He turned and froze when their eyes met. Rachel? You lied to me, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it trembled. I didn't lie, he said quickly. I just didn't tell you everything. That's not better. He stepped forward, cautious. I didn't want you to feel like a project. I wanted you to know me. Really know me. Not the title. Not the company. Just me. She shook her head. You made me feel like I'd earned something real. Like this connection it was built on respect, trust. But now I see I was just another line item in a donation ledger. That's not true, he said, voice cracking. You're not a project. Don't she cut in her voice sharp. Don't try to fix it with pretty words. You can give me a cafe, a Coda Castle, but don't pretend I need you to survive. The words hit him harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. She stepped back, grabbed her coat off the hook, and turned. Come on, Ellie, she called. Ellie, confused and quiet, glanced from Garrett to her mother, but obeyed. They left without another word. Garrett stood there alone in the fluorescent light of the hallway. The warmth from the stove still lingered in the air, but it felt hollow now. The chatter of volunteers faded into static. He had tried to build something beautiful, but it collapsed under the weight of silence. And as the kitchen door closed behind her, he realized. He hadn't just lost her trust. He'd lost her. For 3 days, Garrett Moore moved through life like a ghost. His team noticed it, first missed calls, unanswered emails, uncharacteristically short meetings. The sharp, calculated man, who once ruled boardrooms, now stared out of windows for long stretches, untouched coffee cooling beside him. Numbers blurred on the screen. None of it mattered. Every morning before the city fully stirred, Garrett took the long way to work, past the old bus stop where he first saw Ellie sleeping. He paused there, snow clinging to his coat, hoping for a glimpse of her tangled hair or Rachel's tired eyes. But they never came. He visited the kitchen once, too. Didn't go in, just stood outside watching volunteers move through motions without her. There was no laughter echoing from the back room, no playful shriek when Ellie spilled markers, no warmth that couldn't be traced to the stove. It was gone. She was gone. And the ache surprised him. He'd built a life on control projects, plans, perfect outcomes. He knew how to win, how to pivot when things failed. But this wasn't a failure. This was loss. One evening, Garrett pulled a bag of leftover meals from the kitchen freezer and began retracing the route they used to walk, through alleys and underpasses, behind churches and along park benches. He delivered meals in silence, nodding quietly to the people who barely looked up. He reached the last stop, a narrow back street lit by a single flickering lamppost. It was quiet, too quiet. He stood beneath the dim glow, snow whispering down around him like ash. Eyes closed, he took a slow breath and heard her voice in his mind. I don't need to be saved. I need to feel like a person. He opened his eyes and whispered to no one. I didn't save her. He looked up at the sky. Snowflakes caught in his lashes. She saved me. It wasn't Rachel's need that had changed him. It was her refusal to be defined by it. Her quiet pride, the steadiness in her step, the way she gave away warmth even when she had none left for herself. Garrett realized he hadn't stayed all those nights to make a difference. He had stayed because she had become his difference. He had fallen in love, not with her struggle, but with her strength, and now without her, the empire he built felt like glass, reflective, fragile, and empty. The kitchen buzzed softly that evening. Volunteers chatted, pots clanked, and steam curled from trays lined with cornbread and rice. But when Garrett walked in, everything seemed to hush just a little. Not out of fear or awe, but because they all knew. He wasn't there as a donor tonight. He was there, waiting. He didn't speak to anyone. Just walked slowly to the far end of the room and sat on the same stool where he used to help Rachel test soup side by side, shoulder to shoulder. He folded his hands in front of him and stared at the counter. Time passed, and then the door to the back room opened. Rachel stepped out, apron on hair pulled into a loose knot. Her face was unreadable. She carried a steaming bowl of soup carrot ginger. He could smell it and placed it gently on the counter in front of him. She didn't say hello, didn't ask questions. Just said, "Eat, I added extra ginger. It's cold out." Garrett looked up at her. His eyes were softer now, less certain, more human. He reached for the spoon, then stopped. "I don't know when it started," he said quietly, barely above the hum of the kitchen. "Maybe it was that night you gave your coat to a stranger who couldn't even say thank you, or when you laughed at a burnt pot even though you hadn't slept. But somewhere along the way, I stopped coming here to help." Rachel didn't speak, but her lips trembled just slightly. She blinked more than once. Garrett continued, his voice steady, but full of something raw. "I came here because I needed you." A breath caught in her throat. "I know how to want things. I can control outcomes, metrics, markets, but I don't know how to want something, someone, and not be sure they'll stay." He paused, eyes still locked with hers. "But I know this nothing I eat tastes right unless it's made by you. No walk feels full unless you're beside me. And when Ellie called me a miracle, I think maybe she was wrong." Rachel blinked, stunned. "Because you're the one I never dared to wish for." She looked away, swallowing hard. Then back at him. Her voice was soft but clear. "Then don't leave again." "I'm not here out of guilt," Garrett said, standing slowly. "I'm not here to save anyone." He stepped forward, resting one hand gently on the edge of the counter between them. "I'm here because you were the one thing I didn't know I was missing." Rachel placed her hand over his. Their fingers intertwined. No more explanations were needed. From the hallway, a small voice whispered, "Told you he'd come back, Mommy." Ellie peeked in, grinning like the moon had shown up early. The soup sat steaming between them, forgotten. Because in that moment, neither of them needed food to feel full. Snow had returned to Asheville, soft and slow, blanketing the hills in white. But this time, it wasn't harsh or lonely. It was gentle like a quiet blessing. Nestled at the edge of the city, just beyond an old rail yard, and beside a stretch of converted brownstones, stood a new kind of place. Hearth Village. Once an abandoned cafe with broken windows and a sagging awning, it now shimmered with light, renovated brick walls, painted shutters, and a wooden sign that read simply, "The Hearth." Inside, it was alive with motion, bowls clinking, laughter echoing, and the smell of fresh bread warming every corner. This wasn't just a soup kitchen. It was a refuge. A shared garden stretched behind the building, its raised beds sleeping under a layer of snow. A playground hummed with the laughter of children bundled in scarves. A tiny classroom tucked inside taught knife skills, resume writing, and how to rebuild a life. And in the center of it all was Rachel, now head chef and program director. She wore a crisp apron with her name stitched above the pocket and moved with the same grace she always had, only now with staff behind her, volunteers beside her, and a vision before her. Ellie, now 5, raced down the hallway with a bright yellow sash reading "Ambassador of Smiles." She had taken the job very seriously, armed with peppermints in her pocket and giggles that could melt ice. Every resident knew her. Every visitor received a greeting and a drawing. On opening day, the community hall overflowed, families who once lived in shelters, donors who once gave anonymously, volunteers who now called it home. Garrett stood at the edge of the small stage, dressed simply, wool coat, no tie. He reached for the microphone, prepared to say a few words, when a blur of motion zipped past the side curtain. "Wait," Ellie called, clambering up the steps. She held a toy microphone in her hand and stood proudly at his side. "This is my dad," she announced to the crowd. A hush fell, followed by soft chuckles. "He's not a miracle. Everyone says he is, but he's not." Garrett blinked, caught off guard. She turned to the audience, her voice firm. "He's my dad now. I wished for him, a long time ago. And he came." The room filled with laughter, applause, and more than a few tears. Rachel stood near the back wall, her hand over her heart, eyes shining. Garrett knelt beside Ellie and whispered, "You know what, kiddo? I think I wished for you too." Later that night, the three of them walked back to the small cottage beside the garden wood floors, shelves of cookbooks, cinnamon, drying by the window. It was Christmas Eve. Inside, Rachel sliced spiced apple cake. Ellie knelt on the windowsill, eyes on the sky. "I think that lantern's mine," she whispered. "I wished for more hugs." Garrett wrapped his arms around them both. And in that quiet, firelit room, he whispered, "You were the miracle I never dared to ask for. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the loudest ones. They don't arrive with grand gestures or dramatic twists. They begin with something small, a coat, a question, a moment of kindness on a snowy night. This story began at a bus stop. It could have ended there, but it didn't because someone stayed. Because Garrett Moore, a man who once measured worth in stock prices and projections, chose to sit beside a shivering child and listen. Because Rachel Bennett, a mother who had every reason to give up on people, let down her guard just enough to let someone in. And because Ellie, a little girl with peppermint sticky fingers and belief too big for her boots, never stopped looking for miracles. We often think of miracles as rare, unreachable things. But maybe they're not. Maybe they're found in warm soup and shared laughter. That's des si bon te faux en svenderetere. In old buildings turned into havens. In the hand that shows up not to rescue, but to remain. Hearth Village wasn't just a building. It was a promise that everyone deserves to be seen. That dignity is a kind of nourishment. That second chances don't arrive wrapped in ribbon, but in real, quiet, lasting love. And that the most beautiful lives aren't built in skyscrapers. They're built in kitchens, on benches, in moments. Thank you for listening to this story. If it stirred something in your heart, consider sharing it. Because someone out there might be waiting for their own miracle, and maybe you're the one who'll bring it. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay warm.